Those of you who have just joined us will know that we've been talking about the bad weather in Marges, so I'm reminded that hurricanes hardly ever happen in Hertfordshire. I don't live in Hertfordshire, but it's not far away. We don't get many tornadoes here, fortunately. Anyway, hello everybody. Welcome to number, I've forgotten it already, 72, I think it is, of our occasional meetings. Good to see you all, as always. The usual announcements then. Our next meeting will be our in-person conference in Sheffield, the Sense of Place conference, 26th of April. And because that's on in late April, we're not going to have one of these Zoom meetings in May, because that meeting's in late April. Then the next Zoom meeting is 1st of June. That'll be the May-June meeting. And then the 6th of July will be the last of the Zoom meetings for this season, as it were, because we allow ourselves the summer off, so we don't meet in later in July and August, back in September. So don't forget us while we're away. Now, the English Folk Dance and Song Society, EFDAS, they've got one of their library lectures this coming Tuesday the 8th, on the subject of Billy Taylor. Is it Billy Taylor? If I got the right word. Anyway, you know the one, the street singer from the early 19th century, street singer and fiddle player. That'll be very interesting. So go to the EFDAS website if you want to book a ticket for that. That's this coming Tuesday the 8th. And EFDAS have just announced the call for papers for their November conference. I haven't got the date written down, but it's in November. And it's this year, their conference is on traditional tunes and popular airs. What EFDAS tend to do is that they cycle for their autumn conference. One year they'll have a song topic, the next year will be dance, and then the third year is either tunes or custom or other topic, and then they go back to song, then dance and so on. So this one will be specifically about the tunes. They've had them before and they are very good. So if I were you, I would try to get to that if you can. It's in November, and
8th and 9th.
At Cecil Sharp House.
8th and 9th, Steve.
8th and 9th. Thank you, Derek. 8th and 9th, 2-day conference in November. Right. So here we go with our two papers today. We've got Martin, who you all know very well, and then Ella Paul. We're talking about the song Bruton Town after Martin. So Martin, as he's just explained, he has trouble hosting the meeting and also doing a presentation because the technology goes wrong. But we'll manage, won't we, Martin? So over to you, Martin.
Okay, thank you. I'll just let me know that this is working okay, Steve.
Yep, it's coming through.
And then we go to there.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. And welcome to an evening at the Saracen's Head. Dartmoor is one of the great wilderness areas of England. 368 square miles of granite moor with rough grazing that provided a living for Neolithic settlers and minerals that attracted medieval miners. In the past, the principal roads skirted the north, south and west of the moor, and only rough pack-horse tracks crossed it until a turnpike road from Morton Hampstead to Tavistock was opened in 1772. The roads to Plymouth and Ashburton met the turnpike at the place where there have been bridges across the Dart and Cowsic rivers, and two bridges became a convenient meeting point for farmers and the site of a regular potato market in the mid-18th century. There was certainly an alehouse there to entertain the marketeers and other travellers. But in 1794, Sir Francis Buller built a new inn, which he called the Saracen's Head, after a figure in the Buller family crest. The Reverend John Sweet painted this view of the inn in 1797. During the 19th century, the Saracen's Head became increasingly popular among the fishermen seeking to try out the local rivers, as well as other early tourists. A fire in 1866 gutted the inn, and it required considerable rebuilding, though the result was very similar to that it replaced, as this painting from 1897 shows. This would have been the building as Sabine Baring-Gould found it when he stayed there in January 1890. Soon after this visit, which was not incidentally his last, a series of extensions to the pub were undertaken, which resulted in its metamorphosis into the Two Bridges Hotel as we see it today. The original building is what you can see on the left of the main block in the photo. Now, until I started preparing for this talk, I'd not given much thought to Baring-Gould's overnight visits to pubs as a feature of his collecting strategy. But when you think about it, you can follow his reasoning that the public house was a good place to meet singers after they'd finished their day's work. He described to the friends who first suggested that he collect old songs, how, when he was a teenager, he'd ridden around Dartmoor, staying overnight at little moorland pubs, and had heard men singing in the evenings. There were 4 parts to his methodology for song collecting. You moved it. Stop it, Shy. That's better. One of his first actions in the autumn of 1888 was to write to local newspapers, asking people to send him their old songs, and this was quite successful. At about the same time, though, he invited singers that he'd heard about locally to visit his home at Lew Trenchard to sing for him. There, he had access to a piano, which he could use to help note the tunes. This, though, limited him to singers who lived nearby, and the process was rather slow. So he then recruited 2 musicians, Henry Fleetwood Shepherd and Frederick Bussell, to go out to singers' homes with him to note the tunes while he wrote down the words. Now, this took a lot of effort, though when they found a good singer, it was very productive, particularly when a relationship with the singer was built up over several visits. By going to pubs, particularly if he had received reports that a pub was noted for singing, he knew that it knew it to be likely that there would be more than one singer present, and that the singing might be made to flow more freely by the influence of alcohol and the presence of friends and fellow singers. Baring-Gould wrote in his further reminiscences, "One New Year's Eve, Mr. Bussell and I were at the Saracen's Head, an inn at Two Bridges on Dartmoor. It's since become an important hotel. Then it was but a modest tavern. We sat in the kitchen in the evening where a number of moormen were gathered to drink in and welcome the new year." Now, this account was written when he was in his late 80s, and his memory has let him down, as it was the 7th of January 1890 that he stayed for 2 nights at the Saracen's Head. He was accompanied by Frederick Bussell, the young Oxford postgraduate who often stayed with his mother in a cottage on the Lew Trenchard estate during his vacations, and who greatly enjoyed his song collecting trips with Baring-Gould. Bussell's field notes are a great help in allowing us to understand what happened that evening and the following day. Baring-Gould's other manuscripts and writing also include information that adds to this understanding and occasionally to misunderstanding. This is one of the pages from Bussell's notes, originally written in pencil and later inked over before the book was given to Plymouth Library, part of the set of manuscripts now called the rough copy. Here you can see Bussell's notation of the beggar man. The singer's name appears at top right, W. Setter. And this was William Setters, a general labourer who lived near the Saracen's Head. Here, Bussell has written the text of the first verse and chorus beneath the tune, something we don't always find in his notes. More often, he would jot down odd words at the start or end of the lines. To the left of the title is the Roman numeral 16, indicating that this was the 16th song noted during this trip. Before they arrived at Two Bridges, Baring-Gould and Bussell had called into a cottage in nearby Princetown to meet Richard Mortimer, a 71-year-old mason who was now semi-bedridden, but was said to be a good singer. He was alone in the house when they arrived and happy to sing for them. Baring-Gould wrote later that they took down a good many of his songs, but there are only 3 to be found in the manuscripts. They then drove the last 2 miles to Two Bridges. Baring-Gould found that he'd left his pencil behind and went back on his way home to retrieve it, but was met by Mortimer's wife, who told him, "You ought to have been ashamed to get an old man like that to sing worldly songs. At his age, he shouldn't sing naught but psalms and hymns." And with a queer look, "I'll take care he don't sing no more such songs so long as I manage him." From Princetown, it was less than 2 miles to the Saracen's Head at Two Bridges. That evening, they went into the kitchen where they sat with the locals who'd gathered there, 5 of whom sang for him. Baring-Gould wrote a magazine article titled "Ploughing Oxen," describing his hunt for the song "The Oxen Ploughing." And in it, he writes about the evening at the Saracen's Head. "One evening 4 years ago, I was sitting in winter in an inn kitchen on Dartmoor, in the settle, beside a huge fire of heaped up and glowing peat. Several more men were present, having their ale, talking over politics, the weather, the condition of the turf harvest the previous season, the cattle and the horses that ran wild on the moor. When one old fellow said, 'I reckon there's none of you here ever seed oxen yoked to a plough.' None had. He continued, 'Aye, but I had driven them when I were mite of a boy. With me hump along, jump along, here drives my lad along. Pretty sparkle merry, good luck Speedwell cherry, we are the lads that can follow the plough.' And this he sang with a robust voice to a pleasant, fresh snatch of melody. 'What's that you're singing?' said I. 'Oh, it's an old song of us ploughboys. 6 oxen we drove, and that's their names, Pretty, Sparkle, Merry, and the rest.' 'Do you know any more of the song?' 'Oh, let me see. For bless me, it's miles of years since I were a little chap and could sing it. But you see, when the horses came in and the oxen went out, there was no call for the song anymore.' And then again he added in a plaintive tone, 'I reckon ploughmen ain't as merry as they used to be. Us used to sing like larks, now us grumbles and growls like bears. Come, give us the old song.' The old fellow passed his hand through his grey hair and screwed up his lips. His face, exposed to the moor storms, was brown as a chestnut. Presently he shook his head. 'It begins somehow like this. Prithee lend your jocund voices, for to listen we're agreed. Come and sing of songs the choicest of the lives the ploughboys lead.' And then he broke down. 'I can do no more,' he said sorrowfully. It's more than 60 years since I've sung that song, and now it's gone from me. Now this is a wonderful description of the evening and the singing of the oxen ploughing. But of course, it's too good to be true. The man who sang the oxen ploughing that evening was Richard Gregory, who was aged 52, so could not have had memories of 60 years ago. But this was not an academical article, and this is a master storyteller at his work. Yet, I believe that it is a conflation of two or more separate events, retold for an audience less interested in the literal truth. On this slide, you can see the songs sung on each day. On the evening of 7th of January, Richard Gregory was the first to sing. He was a 52-year-old water bailiff who'd been born in Lazant, Cornwall. He lived at Prince Hall Cottage with his wife Eliza and his 6 children. He sang 6 songs: The Villainous Sea Captain, better known as The Banks of Green Willow, The Ploughboys, that is the oxen ploughing, Salisbury Plain, A Poacher's Song, Liskeard Fair, and the Greenland Whale Fishery. And there's also a tune for the Green Bed, which is attributed to him in the personal copy, but this is not recorded in the rough copy like the others and may have been heard on a later visit. He was followed by Will Setters, a general labourer aged 47 who lived in Spaders Cottage, half a mile up the road towards Morton Hampstead. His wife was Ellen, and 4 of their children were still at home. He sang a version of The Outlandish Night, and then followed immediately with Green Hospital, a version of Sailor Cut Down in His Prime. He contributed 2 more songs that evening, The Ragged Beggarman and The Female Highwayman. Baring-Gould noted in his personal copy manuscript, W. Setter is a most uncertain singer. He rarely sings 2 verses alike. Richard Bickle contributed just 1 song to the evening, and that was a rather predictably Widdicombe Fair. Baring-Gould noted in Songs of the West that his was an early form of the melody, though he chose to publish the version that was most commonly sung and which we now think of as the standard version. I've not yet found any biographical details for Richard Bickle, and Bickle is a rather common name on Dartmoor. 49-year-old James Mortimer, not a relative of Richard as far as we can establish, lived at Crocken Farm, a short distance up a track leading northwards onto the moor from the Saracen's Head. His working life had started as a coachman before he moved to Crocken Farm. His wife was Sarah, and they had 3 sons and a daughter. He sang 2 songs that evening. The first was The Female Cabin Boy, and the other was Emma Snow, a minstrel song from America, which Bussell valiantly noted the tune for, but Baring-Gould didn't record the words in his later manuscripts, even if he wrote them down at the time. One of the best songs that came out of the evening was The Bell Ringing, a song that is widely sung in the revival after having been picked up by Cyril Tawney and later Tony Rose. The sound of church bells seems to flow through the tune, and a Devonshire bell ringer, Don Roberts, told me a few years ago that the tune is based on a famous peal, 60 on thirds, which is rung at every Devonshire ringers competition. Baring-Gould named the singer as William George Kurzweil, who he described as a moorland farmer, an old man near 2 bridges in the heart of Dartmoor. He went on, when sung by the old farmer over a great fire in the kitchen, his clear, robust voice imitating the bells produced an indescribable charm. I'd love to be able to tell you more about him, but he's not so far been identified in the public record. There is a George Kurzweil in the 1891 census, who is quite likely to be him. He was a 68-year-old widower living on Tavistock Road, Princetown, described then as a farm labourer. I think it likely that he may have been working at Bear Down near 2 bridges, but I've not been able to confirm it. The following day, Baring-Gould and Bussell left the Saracen's Head to travel to Huckabee, 4 miles away, where they hoped to meet an old man who they had been told knew several songs. Unfortunately, they got nothing from him, and that seems to have happened a lot. So to console themselves, they went on to the nearby Forest Inn, where they met the landlord Richard Cleeve and his son Moses. They obtained one song from each of them, a version of the Everlasting Circle and the Bold Dragoon. Bussell noted the latter in his notebook under the title Dragon's Ride, with the comment, "This tune is a very memorable one to us. It's the sole spoils of a long drive in the stormiest of Dartmoor weather from Two Bridges to Huckabee Bridge. We value the Dragon's Ride particularly highly." Baring-Gould wrote excellent by the notation of the tune, but found words of the Bold Dragoon to be too coarse to be presentable. When he published it as number 65 in the third part of Songs and Ballads of the West, the words were substantially rewritten, and, it must be said, not particularly well written. He didn't use Richard Cleeve's tune either, but that of a version he'd received from the journalist William Crossing, who'd collected the song on Dartmoor in 1878. The tune was too good to waste, however. Written underneath the notation, you can see a set of words that Baring-Gould is trying to fit to the tune. It's a fragment of The Lowlands of Holland, and he collected a very full version of the song from the quarryman John Watts of Alder near Lew Trenchard in 1893. But Watts's tune was the same as Baring-Gould had heard to the Irish ballad Willie Riley. So he fitted some of Watts' words to Richard Cleeve's tune, and it was published in the 1905 edition of Songs of the West as I'll Build Myself a Gallant Ship. They returned to the Saracen's Head through dreadful winter weather, and the collecting recommenced in the evening with some of the same singers. George Kurzweil reprised his song, The Bell Ringing, so that Bussell could check his notation, which had been a little uncertain the previous evening. They heard more songs from Richard Gregory, Will Setter, and James Mortimer, but there was a new singer present on the second evening. The landlady of the Saracen's Head at the time of Baring-Gould's stay was Mary Smith, who combined the role of innkeeper with that of a farmer. Her 25-year-old son, Harry, was also described in the census as a farmer, and it was him that sang for the collectors on the second day of the visit. They met again on at least one more occasion, and Baring-Gould reported in the notes to Lord Thomas and Fair Eleanor that he'd heard that ballad from Henry Smith, the taverner's son, on Dartmoor. There are 5 songs from Henry Smith in the collection, including 2 child ballads. And while it's gratifying that such a young man should know traditional ballads, there is a fly in the ointment. This is the page from the 1891 census, which shows the entries made as the census taker moved northeast from Two Bridges on the Morton-Hampstead Road. At the top, you can see James Mortimer with his neighbour Will Setter's next at Spader's Cottage. Then the next entry is for Cherrybrook, a farm which is being farmed by 49-year-old Henry Smith, no relation to the Smiths at the Saracen's Head. And to ensure confusion for future researchers, he also had a son called Harry, and his wife was Harriet. This contemporary map shows the places where each of the singers lived. You can see how isolated they were and how the pub would be the obvious location for them to gather socially. There's no indication in Baring-Gould's notes that he heard songs from 2 Harry Smiths, but it would be surprising if the Cherrybrook farmer were not part of the social group at the Saracen's Head, and his age matches that of the other men present. Census data showed that they'd lived in the same places for at least 10 years by 1891 and must have known each other well. Could the older Harry Smith have contributed one or more songs? What were the chances of two men having the same names living in such a small community? I'm not sure that I'll ever be able to resolve these issues. As I said earlier, I'd not looked at Baring-Gould's visit to pubs analytically before, so it had not occurred to me that the visits to the Saracen's Head was the first of such visits. I think that Baring-Gould would have counted it a success. One gets a sense that he and Bussell enjoyed themselves. Bussell often adds little jokey comments to his notes and occasionally jots down something that amused him. On the second day, for example, he recorded a brief exchange between two of the men. One said, "I had music in my head all night." And his friend replied, "I dare say if anybody had taken your head as a tambourine, he'd have got some music out of it." Baring-Gould produced several music accounts of the visit to Two Bridges in prose that he's written. They do not always fit with each other or with the known facts, and those differences are sometimes because he's relied too much on his memories, and in other cases because he's telling a story. And for that purpose, the literal truth is less important than the narrative. He subsequently went on to collect in pubs on further occasions, and apart from finding songs, he gathered more great anecdotes. How they were thrown out of the pub at Holme after the village policeman called time, for example, or the visit to South Seal, when the whole village turned up at the pub to watch the collectors at work. This talk was put together in 3 weeks at a time when we had no speakers for today's meeting, and I volunteered to bring forward an idea I had been thinking about. It proved a little more tricky and hence more interesting than I expected. And I am going to continue the work to look at these other events. There are a lot of other things to look at, including the two men, William Crossing and Thomas Kaiser, who collected songs on Dartmoor early in the 19th century and gave them to Baring-Gould. Kaiser gives very good descriptions of of hearing songs in the pub. Cecil Sharp did not find collecting in pubs worked for him, while Vaughan Williams was much more than happy to do so. I'm hoping that I'll be able to write a more complete study in time for the Whitby Folk Week this year, and that I'll be able to share it with some of you there. For now, I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. So thank you for listening.
As always. As always, Martin, thank you. Something that was just thrown together at the last minute. That was rather professionally done, as always. So thank you. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen and others, you can put your hand up if you want to react. Down at the bottom there, little arrow by react, raise hand. If you wave at me, I probably won't see you because I can only see 5 or 6 of you. So please do go down to react if you want to raise your hand. Now, Marge's iPhone has raised her hand. Are you there, Marge? You want to unmute?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so you tantalized us with the theory or theories that you might be working on. Could you give us a little taste of what those are?
You mean, or the...
Didn't you say toward the end of the paper that you were going to be theorizing on some of the material that that you're working with?
Yeah, I think the main takeout from this is, as I said, I hadn't realised, firstly, that was Baring-Gould's first collecting session in a pub, and that he went on to do it several more times while he was collecting. Cecil Sharp didn't like collecting in pubs. You can read a little about that in Steve's book. And the reason seems to be probably because he was working on his own. he couldn't really ask singers to stop and go back in that setting.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Whereas, of course, Baring-Gould had someone else, in this case, Bustle, writing the tunes down while he focused on the
Made
words.
things easier.
And they could do a better job between the two of them, although even Bustle was defeated by the bell ringing and had to ask for it to be repeated on the second night.
Oh, yeah.
And otherwise, it's about the people, the singers that he collected from. So that's what I'll be focusing on, building up the biographies of the people we met in the pubs.
So did you get a good sense of the kind of rapport that he was able to establish with singers? Was he a good field worker in that sense?
I think so. The fact that there was this badinage going on in the pubs while they were collecting sort of says it was quite a fun occasion, and I have no doubt that he provided a little bit of alcohol to help things along.
Yes.
And of course, Baring-Gould was not averse to a drop or two himself.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Marge. Oh, of course, one of the things that people say about pub collecting, certainly at that time, collecting in the pub, is that it cuts out the women singers.
Yeah.
You did mention the landlady. There was nearly always a landlady around. Flora Thompson says, because the landlady was there in the pub, then that kept the songs a bit cleaner than they would have been otherwise. But certainly some people have said that if we rely too much on the pubs, then, we're getting the public singing rather than the domestic singing, if you like, which I suppose is true. But we want both, don't we? We want it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And you couldn't say that all the songs that were sung that evening were the more polite versions. There were a couple there that couldn't be published as they stood. But Baring-Gould was very well aware that his methods to that time had not brought him into the realm of women's songs, which is why he later tried to do more. But in that case, it had to be by visiting them in their homes.
Yeah, so different method for different people, as it were.
That's right.
I'd like to know, did he wear his dog collar when he went in the pub and collected?
I would say he would, yes. There are very few pictures of him without his dog collar. Right.
Okay. Because he sounds rather a sort of jolly chap, but in the pub, and it sounds like he mucked in with everybody.
Yeah, and of course Bustle was quite a character as well. It would be interesting to know what the singers made of him. This rather strange Oxford academic in a pub in the middle of Dartmoor. I would have loved to have been there.
Was he the one that wore yellow breeches?
Lilac.
Lilac. Sorry.
Lavender trousers.
My God, I wish we could go there. If we invent a time machine, that's the first place we're going to go. That's great. Any more questions from anybody?
Abby's got a question.
Oh, sorry, I haven't seen any. Abby. It hasn't come up.
Unmute yourself, Abby.
There I am.
There you are.
No, you've muted yourself again.
Okay. All right. I those who know me know that I'm much saddened by how much of the bawdy or erotic material got censored out of what should be a normal part of our tradition. But I've been surprised at how many churchmen were collected and this material, were aware of it, were not disturbed by it, as I said about Baring-Gould, just couldn't print it in the regular printing. But he seemed to at least sometimes do the opposite. The only one I can cite is the Dilly song, "Children Go Our Sunday," or "Where Are We," where he has, as I understand it, selected non-religious verses of all the verses he got for what he printed. And it seemed odd to me that he would do that.
Yeah, I'd have to remind myself of what he actually did. I'm sorry, it's not top of my head. I used to sing it, so I should know. Let me have a quick look. Do you mind if I just
Yes, feel free.
won't take a moment? And but it's where he got it from that's the key thing, I think. Dilly song number 78. Just looking for the notes for that. See how well organized. I know where all this stuff is. I just can't remember it. Yes, he does in talk about the religious version. The religious version is given in the notes to the song, but obviously what he's chosen in the published version is something non-religious. And yes, why did he do that? So you've got still got Lily White Babes. You've got what is your for? It's a dilly hour and blooms the gilly flower. So that is more likely one of the Cornish versions. He doesn't actually say here where he got it from. So if you're interested, I'll have a quick look and get back to you on that, Abby.
It's not again, just as I understand it, and my memory is far worse than yours, that he had a selection of verses and he was conflating different versions for the printed one, so that he could choose to select out. And I was wondering if you had any notion of what was in his mind in doing this, because again, he did not seem to personally object to erotic verses. It didn't disturb him at all, and other church collectors have been the same in Scotland and England. So, and in fact, some erotic material we wouldn't have except for the religious collectors.
Yeah.
So, I don't understand what was in his mind, though.
No, well, I think the main thing in his mind was he was creating his idea of what a good song should be, something good to sing. So, yeah.
We'll have to move on a bit. One more question from Henry. To unmute, Henry.
My mother came from Chagford on Dartmoor, and we spent all our summer holidays on Dartmoor, and we've got lots of souvenirs. In fact, this picture behind my head is a picture by William Morris of Dartmoor, and this was a wedding present for my mother.
Yeah.
And we're laughing because he's shown us his mug from Widdicombe Fair. Everybody should have one of those.
Yeah, I don't have one of those, but yeah, that's
right. We will have to move on.
Right, thank you very much. I enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Henry.
And before we move on, I'll remind you that as one of Baring-Gould's singers said, we used to sing like larks, but now we grumble like bears. So now that's not opposite for our next speaker, which is Ella Paul, who's joining us, I think, for the first time.
Hiya.
Hello, Ella.
Hi. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that very interesting talk. I'm just on the edge of Dartmoor-ish in Totnes, so that was very appropriate to me. I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, we can see that. Excellent. Did you share sound?
There is some, I did share sound, yep.
Yeah, good.
One sound thing. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the Bramblebriar or Bruton Town. And I'm going to focus mainly on a version sung by Mrs. Emily Joyner from Hertfordshire, where hurricanes hardly happen. And I'll talk about her and some details of the song's form. And when I was putting this talk together, I kind of put everything that I wanted to say together and then thought, okay, what is it actually about? And it's essentially just about how brilliant the song is and all the things that I like about it. So we'll start by hearing some of Lou Killen singing it, and this version Lou learnt from the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, which is Emily Joyner's version. So here we go.
In Bruton Town there lived a farmer who had 2 sons and 1 daughter dear. By day and night they were contriving to fill their parents' heart with fear. He told his secrets to no other, but unto his brother this he said: I think our servant courts our sister, I think they have a great mind to wed. But I'll put an end to all their courtship, I'll send him silent to the grave. They asked him to go a-hunting without any fear or strife, and then these bold and wicked villains, they took away this young man's life. And in the ditch there was no water, where only bush and briar grew. They could not hide the blood of slaughter, and so in the ditch his body they threw.
And we don't really have time to listen to the whole thing, so there's just the few opening verses. So Angela Carter wrote the sleeve notes for Lou Killen's 1965 album Ballads and Broadsides, and states Killen learnt this version from the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, collated by Vaughan Williams and Lloyd and published in 1959. The version they published was Emily Joyner's singing, collected by Janet Broadwood. However, Joyner couldn't remember the beginning of the ballad, and so the verse published in the Penguin Book of Folk Songs was an edit suggested by Cecil Sharp. The notes read, Mrs. Joyner was unable to remember clearly the beginning of the ballad, and our first 2 stanzas are taken from the version obtained by Cecil Sharp from Mrs. Overd of Langport, Somerset in 1904. Vaughan Williams and Lloyd also removed a repeated verse that Joyner sang. She sang that last verse we heard before I stopped it, about in the ditch. She sang that also as verse 9. And that edit has some interest to me and a bit of relevance shortly. And that's it, published in 1959. When Janet Broadwood, Lucy Broadwood's niece, transcribed the singing of Emily Joyner in 1914, Joyner was in her late 50s. The 12 songs collected from her were published in the June 1915 Journal of the Folk Song Society magazine, and included among them Lord Thomas and Fair Eleanor, The Trees They Do Grow High, and The Bold Fisherman, as well as Lord Burling, or Burlington's Sister, which is what she sang, or The Murdered Servant Man. Oh, dog's going crazy. Here are some of the notes accompanying the song written by Lucy Broadwood. I'll read them out. The Folk Song Society is greatly indebted to Miss Janet Broadwood of Bone Hill, St. Stephen's, Herts, who discovered in Mrs. Joyner an excellent singer of traditional songs, and who has faithfully taken down texts of most of hers included in this journal. Mrs. Joyner, a widow who does odd jobs in the garden, learnt a large number of songs from her mother and grandmother, who had in their turn learnt them from her great-grandmother Sarah Hawkins. All of these women, who were of English stock, were natives of Hertfordshire and spent their lives there. The great-grandmother and grandmother kept a platting school at Livestock Green, where the scholars learnt to read and to plait straw for hats. Mrs. Joyner, who herself learnt there, said the girls sang as they plaited and taught each other the songs and ballads learnt from their elders. Mrs. Joyner's way of singing may possibly be the outcome of this union of voice and delicate handicraft, for she renders her songs with a great rhythmical feeling and purity of musical intervals, whilst choosing a much slower pace and a more deliberate and expressive phrasing than are usually adopted by our English country singers. That's the end of the quote. I think that's a very sort of vivid description. I can sort of imagine her singing through that. Nicholas Blatchley's article on Hertz Memories, the Community Archive Network, states that Emily Joyner was born Emily East in 1855 in the Hemel Hempstead Regional Registration District. Her father's identity, this is a quote, her father's identity is seemingly unknown and she seems to be missing from the 1861 and 1871 censuses. In the summer of 1874, Emily married a man named James Joyner. She would have been 19 at the time of her wedding. And in the 1881 census, the couple have an 8-year-old son, William, whose birth would have therefore predated the wedding. In 1881, the couple was living in Hendon, Middlesex, but in both 1891 and 1901, they're listed in St. Stephen and may have been living in Chiswell Green by then. James died in 1905, and in 1911, Emily was living at Chiswell Green, and she was described as working as a casual gardener in 1914. Emily died in 1938 at the fine age of 83. I don't have, because it's such a short talk, I won't go much into the ballad's history, and it's a really fascinating ballad in terms of its history. And I imagine members of this audience might be familiar with its history. So I'll just say very briefly that Lucy Broadwood made the suggestion that its writer lifted the narrative from Boccaccio's Decameron, the 5th story on the 4th day. And the story is of Lisabella and her 3 brothers who murder her lover Lorenzo, who is their father's affair handler. She then dreams Lorenzo comes to her bedside and tells her that her brothers killed him. When she wakes, she goes to where Lorenzo is lying, and in quite a dramatic turn of events, she takes a knife, cuts off his head, and plants it in a pot and grows basil from it. And she's like weeping into the pot of basil, and she's watering it with her tears, and so loads of basil grows, and it's very fragrant. And the ballad differs in a few ways, but where it really departs from the narrative is at the point of Lisabella cutting off Lorenzo's head. In the ballad, she cries, she goes down to the ditch where her lover's body lies. She's weeping and lamenting with him, and then she returns home and she cites revenge on her brothers. So in Boccaccio's story, he actually quotes the first lines of a Sicilian folk song where the singer is lamenting the theft of a basil plant. The lines are, oh, I missed that slide. It's kind of not very relevant, but it's an image taken in 1885, so it's not really anything to do with Emily Joyner, apart from she would have been about 30 at the time, and taken about 10 to 15 miles away from where she lived. And it's platters demonstrating their craft at an exhibition in Luton Platt Halls. So the Sicilian folk song that is in Boccaccio's Decameron, in the story of Lisabella and the pot of basil, the line, he just quotes the opening of this song, which are, "A thief he was, I swear, a sorry Christian he, that took my basil of Solano fair, that flourished mightily." And as there is the question of whether Boccaccio took the story in the Decameron from a folk tale, and I don't think there's any evidence of this, but it wouldn't be out of place if he had. Could he just wild speculation. Could he have adapted the ending inspired by this folktale, meaning that perhaps inspired by the Sicilian folk song, meaning that perhaps if he did get it from an older folktale, could that be closer to the narrative of the ballad, which doesn't include this the head cutting off part. But that is just me being curious. And I'm aware in the room with us here potentially is Steve Gardam, who wrote this brilliant article on the Bridgewater Merchant and an attempt to reconstruct its original that Steve sent to me. And so I'd be interested to hear the thoughts. And if anyone is interested in the ballad's history, I recommend this article on the Mustad site. And there's lots of brilliant stuff to read about it. I'll talk about some more. So Lucy Broadwood suggested that the folk ballad was possibly written from the 16th century poet Hans Sachs' versification of Boccaccio's story. And in 1918, we have a very rigorous study done by the American folklorist Henry M. Boulden, where he responds to Broadwood's claims and argues that the ballad comes directly from Boccaccio and not via Hans Sachs. And here's a quote from Boulden's 1918 essay, which I think I like because it talks about the form and what I really love about the form. This is a quote. The Bramblebriar shows further no trace of a refrain, makes no use of formulas of question and answer, has no series, no incremental repetition, and none of the familiar ballad commonplaces. There are no gaps in the action any more than in Boccaccio's story. Each step is related in chronological order, and the sequence of events is duly explained. Which I think what we experience when we listen to it is just how the lyrics are very stark and the storytelling is very direct, and it's kind of, without use of a better word, it's a very economically worded ballad, and that I think that's very striking. And another feature of this ballad that I find very striking, which is what I'm going to talk about for the remaining time, is the symmetry in the structure of the song, in the narrative. So Mark W. Booth, in his book, The Experience of Songs, tells us that symmetry is a common pattern found in oral composition. Booth uses the example of the ballad The Bitter Withy, which he agrees is an oral ballad, to demonstrate this symmetry, and I quote, "When it's written down, it falls into a startlingly rigorous pattern of boxes within boxes." And here we have, oh, there's the quote from Boulden. Sorry, I'm not keeping up with my slides. So there is Mark Booth's diagram of the Bitter Withy, the lyrics of the Bitter Withy, and as an audio description of this, it's got the lyrics all written out, and then so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 9 verses, and he's the central verse. So the 5th verse has its own bracket, and then the 4th and the 6th verses are connected via a bracket, and then the 3rd and the 7th, etc., etc. So Booth quotes David Buchan, who argues that such patterns are the essence of oral narrative verses. He uses the term architectonic pattern to describe the structures that arise within oral poetry, which, and I quote, reflects the non-literate person's mode of apprehension as spatial as well as simply linear and sequential. This is another quote from Buchan. Framing is one of the hallmarks of oral poetry, by which the maker keeps a grip on the interrelations of all the parts of the poem. So in oral composition, end quote. So in oral composition, without the abilities that writing on paper give us to hold a narrative in place while we compose the various aspects of the song, symmetry allows the composer and also the singer, I would say, who holds it in their memory, to maintain a grip on the whole poem. This is another quote from Booth. In a genuinely oral, unwritten ballad such as The Bitter Withy is attested to be, we meet a thicket of structures that are not only elusive to our perception in performance, but that could not, I think, even be lucidly described without written diagram, or at least the visualization of the written out script of the performance. So he's saying that if we didn't write it down, it's not something that we would consciously necessarily notice, which I think is definitely true of the Bramble Briar. Yeah. So Booth calls the structure in the Bitter Withy an ordering that works itself out in departure and return, rising and falling tension. And he then goes on to try and describe why an oral composer might sort of unconsciously use these oral poetic devices like symmetry or departure and return, basically using neuroscience, which I was not going to go into, obviously, but it's a really great chapter in his book, The Experience of Songs, so I'd recommend that. So here we have Mrs. Joyner's version as printed in the Folk Song Society magazine. And here we have some of the symmetry. It's not as immaculate as in the Bitter Withy, but I do think it's kind of there enough to be noticeable. And I certainly think it, I think it really, it definitely creates a lot of shape in the song. And she also sang verse 9 as in the ditch there was no water where only bush and briar grew. They couldn't hide the blood of slaughter, so in the ditch his body they threw, which Vaughan Williams and Lloyd edited out when they published it in 1959. But the thing that really interests me, which is something that my teacher Alice said, which is that all great works of art, and I think I can be so bold as to say that I really think this song is a great work of art, is got lots of things going on at the same time in it, and in the Bramble Briar we have this narrative line playing out, which is the departure and the return. So starting in the house, the two brothers have an ill intention that is a secret. They take the servant man to the ditch and they murder him, and then the two brothers return to the house. Then the sister has the dream. In the middle of the dream is a jewel, which is a precious center. The sister goes out to the ditch. There she laments, which I kind of consider as the opposite of death. And then she returns to the house, and when she does this, she exclaims revenge, which in this context, I think can be understood as kind of, revenge as opposite to the secret in the brothers have in the first verse here. So the narrative arc of departure and return is one thing that's going on in the song, and then you have this other aspect of the lyrics, which is not departing and returning, which is the kind of forward motion of the language. And I'll quote Alden again in the quote I read earlier, but I'll just say it again. The Bramble Briar shows further no trace of a refrain. It makes no use of formulas of question and answer, has no series, no incremental repetition, and none of the familiar ballad commonplaces. There are no gaps in the action, any more than in Boccaccio's story. Each step is related in chronological order, and the sequence of events is duly explained. So I just think it's very beautiful how one sung line can contain both of these shapes, which is the symmetry in the narrative, the departure and the return, and then also this sort of forward-moving, not stopping, not turning back language, which really doesn't ever pause, doesn't really repeat itself. Well, that verse excluded. Yeah. And then I'll just finish by saying the American academic Elaine Scarry, she writes about symmetry quite a lot. And in her book On Beauty and Being Just, makes the observation that beauty and justice share the feature of symmetry. In the realm of beauty, symmetry can be seen in the wings of a butterfly or the reflection of foliage on the surface of still water. In the realms of justice, symmetry looks like equal retribution for a crime or wealth equality. And I think that the song Bruton Town certainly could be described as beautiful. And in its lyrical content, touches on themes of justice in the relationship of love across classes. And in the last line, the sister exclaims that her brothers will be hung for the crime of killing her lover. So if the song is symmetrical, the center, the point at which the butterfly's wings touch, is the verse in which the sister dreams her dead lover comes to her bedside, dressed in his bloody coat, and says, "Don't weep for me, my dearest jewel, don't weep for me, nor care nor pine," which is such a beautiful and subtle line. So the center of the song is a dream, and in the center of the dream is a jewel. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Bella. Sorry, there was a pause there because I was still thinking about reading what was on the screen. Thank you, that was excellent. Do you want to unshare your
Oh, yeah.
thing so that we can see you? And if anybody's got any questions, one of the things that struck me while you were talking is that I may be wrong here because I can't remember. The song itself, as we know it, the Bruton Town song, doesn't go back very far, as far as we know. The first version we've got is 1840s, if I remember rightly, American version. Whereas all the talk of Boccacio and stuff makes us immediately puts us in mind of, medieval stuff and, back when everything was oral. And yet, if we can't argue, can we argue that the song is older than 1840s? Because 1840s doesn't sound like the sort of time when people were doing this kind of composition. Do you see what I mean? I'm not like arguing against it. I'm just saying that the chronology has to come in there somewhere. Do you think that it's older than the earliest version that we've got, for instance?
I mean, yeah, not necessarily at all. And I think that's what's quite mysterious about it is it does have lots of features of being an oral ballad, but very little evidence to say that it is. So yeah, I don't think I could say either way, and I wonder if Steve Gardam is in the audience and would be able to speak about that.
But I mean, some people would take it literally as evidence that it is old because of the features you've identified. In other words, that is enough. We can see that it's old because of the way it's put together, which is possible. Steve hasn't put his hand up, so I suppose he hasn't got anything to say.
Yeah, but I guess also with the features like the symmetry, also there is just as many features in its writing to say that it would have been likely to have been lifted directly from supposedly Boccaccio. Just the way that the way that the narrative doesn't ever kind of stop. It's doesn't have many oral features like that are common in oral poetic, like repetition and all of these things, which would make.
Steve does have his hand up now. Steve, do you want to chip in?
Yeah. If you go, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, if you go to the article I wrote on Mustrad, I tried to demonstrate that the ballad dates to about 1750. There was another very similar ballad that even has verses in common with it, which was a broadside ballad or a garland ballad from 1750, written in Bristol. And I think this was written in Bristol as well, around about the same time, maybe even the same author, because you've got, similar. The start is almost identical of the ballad. It's the Bristol Garland, I think it's called. It's from
Bristol
about
Bridegroom?
Sorry?
Is it Bristol Bridegroom, is it? Or
No, I know there's lots of those Bristol ones. It's called the Bristol Garland, I think, offhand, but it's on the article. There's a copy of it on the article. And also, I thought I'd demonstrated fairly clearly that it is actually taken from a broadside version of Boccaccio's Decameron. It's almost word for word.
Okay. Yes. And how many verses does it have can you remember off
But
the top?
about 20, 22, something like that. The two longest versions are from America. There's one in the Douglas collection from about 1830, something like that, and there's one in the Gardner and Chickering, Michigan, Southern Michigan version as well, and they're both very long, much longer than English versions.
Mm.
That's the longest version you're given there, that 12 stanzas. That's the long. The vast majority of English versions only have about 6 or 7 verses.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. So yeah, I think if it did come from did you say an American broadside?
No, it was collected in America from oral tradition. Those are manuscript versions. One's from oral tradition, one's from an early manuscript. Well, early, I say 1830, something like that, I think. So, it's obviously been taken over from America. I think it was written in Bristol about Bridgewater. Obviously, it's Bridgewater Merchant, the earliest versions. And then the people in Bridgewater, I think, took exception to that and moved it to Bruton.
right, Vic Gallant's got his hand up. Vic, are you muted, Vic? Unmute.
Unmute, Vic.
Vic, unmute.
Can't hear you. Unmute,
Sorry,
Vic.
thank you, Steve.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's one of the great songs. I really believe that. But I think that the problem might be in your use of Bolden as a source. Now, he is deeply influenced by Child, and you get a situation where Child says, well, these pattern songs like Lord Randall are the ancient ones, Now, there's no absolute proof of that. And we do get a few songs that are, have very ancient stories. And I'm thinking here of that deeply anti-Semitic piece, the Little Sir Hugh, where we know this is a medieval story. We don't have any versions of it until the 18th century. And of course, where has it been in between? Well, I mean, these things go around and come around. I don't know. I don't think, you see, when you say there's no question and answer, there isn't a question and answer in the way of where have you been, Lord Randall? I've been here. What have you done? That sort of question and answer. There is actually a lot of questioning in that text, and some of the dynamic is between the speakers. She asks the brothers, where her lover is, and so there is a conversation, there is questioning. So I think the problem is very hard, and it is one of the great mysteries as to where these stories disappear to and then come back again. And of course, it's always tempting perhaps to rewrite it with the pot of basil in it, but I mean it never crops up in the English versions that I've seen. But I think, and Buchan, a lot of doubt has been cast on that sort of, the importance of symmetry stuff. I just don't. Thank you for that. I wouldn't have put it like that, but it's certainly an opinion. I think it's, I mean, songs exist in all sorts of forms, and some of them are very symmetrical, some of them are not, and I think there's a whole set of really interesting issues. I do agree, it is one of the great songs, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've said enough.
Great, thank you.
So here's a test for you, ladies and gentlemen. Is there any other folk song in the English tradition where a woman cuts off her lover's head? and puts it anywhere, a pot of basil or anywhere. I mean, it is. I mean, that kind of thing does sound a bit weird for our
In
general.
some versions of Lord Thomas and Fair Eleanor, he cuts the head off and kicks it against the wall, doesn't he?
Against the wall. That's true.
That's a rather lovely graphic
Yes, that's right.
possibility.
Okay, so there's more decapitation than I. Any more questions from anybody? Everything moved up? No, I think we are. Oh, yes, sorry, John Baxter. John.
I was just going to say, with her head tucked underneath her arm, is
Okay, with her head tucked underneath her arm. Okay.
yeah. But I just, it did strike me when I was listening that there were an awful lot of assumptions made about the song in a lot of these theoretical articles. The problem is that people make assumptions about the ancientness of ballads, and whilst some of them are quite old, quite a lot of them aren't as well, and because there's an underlying assumption that they're all really old, it makes it difficult to really take them as seriously as you might, if that makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say they're crap, although I worry about people applying neuroscience to the reception of folk songs. I think it's what we used to call the wrong level of analysis.
Yeah.
And
well, certainly, yeah, it is really bizarre conclusions that he comes to looking at like brain scans of people singing and like time perception of singing compared to talking. It's totally weird. And I didn't mean to suggest that I think that this ballad comes from like a pre-12th century Italian folktale source. I just thought that was a sort of I just thought that it was interesting that there was a Sicilian folk song that perhaps changed Boccaccio's telling of the story, but it's just wild speculation, really.
I mean, I just as an aside, I'm interested in how these songs got passed along through the long 19th century. This doesn't appear to be a song that was sung in polite company. It's not none of the titles appear in sort of penny readings or songs. It's not been tidied up for a ballad concert or dumbed down for music hall. So I mean yeah, so the other people probably have ideas, but that was something I was looking at before the meeting because it sparked my interest. But anyway, thank you for your talk. I shall shut up.
Thank you, John. Any more questions or discussion? Thank you. Anyway, well, it certainly got us talking, and there is something odd about it, isn't there? So again, we need that time machine to go back to ask Boccacio what the hell he was up to. Okay, thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you to our two speakers. Excellent talks as always. And I hope you'll join us again for the conference in later this month, and then our next Zoom meeting on the 1st of June. So thank you. Very well. Go and enjoy the sunshine. Bye for now.